So let it be written. So let it be done. This is Tabletop Terrors. This is our live quarantine hangout, and we're going to just hang out. There's no Q&A. There's no specific topic, but we are going to hang out in lieu of our normal release. We thought it would be cooler to instead involve you, the community, in our release. So, one thing we do want to say is that we have just released a Dead Man's Guide to Dragongrin through Absolute Tabletop, and that is our campaign setting, and we're super, super proud of how it has turned out. But if you don't even want to buy that, you can get a free 75-page full-color character creation PDF, absolutely free of charge. So go to absolutetabletop.com, and if you don't want to buy a Dead Man's Guide to Dragongrin, go to and get your character creation PDF and start rolling up characters for Dragongrin. So how are you guys doing?
I believe the phrase you were looking for was "how you doing," but I doing okay. We've already got a couple people in the chat here, like 9 people immediately.
Amazing.
Ampersand Man says they're rewatching Provoker season 1. They're about to be at the part with the with the black dragon.
redacted. Right.
At some point, you got to not worry about spoilers.
I think we've.
Michael Anderson is here, really enjoying Dead Man's Guide to Dragongrin. Thanks for making it so packed with usable stuff. T. the Writer's here. Evelyn Tyndall's here, and Barker from Ignite Inspire the Story is also here. So
yes. Special thank you to Barker, who told me to make sure to put the YouTube link in the comments, and I did that. I appreciate it, man. Thank you so much. Because in the event itself, you can't actually see the clickable link. You can't actually click on it. So, yes. But I just want to say that a Dead Man's Guide to Dragongrin, I was kind of figuring out, like, well, when am I going to have my big sappy moment of where I share everything with everyone and kind of say thank you. And it's like, you know what? The truth is, it's not finished yet. It is finished, but we still have another 30 days to like proof it and go through the process of essentially making sure it's the perfect book we want. And I think that for me, I'm not going to do that until we send the final file off to the printer, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It is like this, it's so amazing to be able to have the book out to people, and that's super awesome. But yeah, the work is not technically done yet,
right?
Which I think is a different bit when we can finally say, like, all right, we've finished a Dead Man's Guide rather than released it, because in this scenario, it is 2 different things.
It totally is. And I'll be real candid and say that I did have a breakdown moment for a second in a Zoom with Barker. And it was just when I was posting it's a sort of an innocuous post, I think. It was my first thank you to the community, but I purposely decided I'm not going to write a big gushy post. I'm just going to write a short post about how it's finished and I need to rest, And from there, I was reading it to him just basically to get a sanity check. And it's funny because I didn't expect it at all. And while I was reading it to him, I broke down and started crying, like just full blown crying. And I was like, I didn't expect that was going to happen. But it was kind of like my moment to sort of just be like, oh, hey, this is done. But now the final part of the journey begins. So I did have a little breakdown.
I mean, obviously all of us worked very hard up until the last point. But you especially were like, I know the work schedule that you were on to try to get that book done within those last couple weeks. So I think a breakdown and a claim of needing to rest is a totally valid and totally, acceptable response to that situation. Yeah, I totally know where you're coming from there.
Yeah, I appreciate that, man. And we got tons of awesome people in the chat. But Jeff, I appreciate you saying that because it was crazy. If I showed you, I might even, I don't know if I should, I can show you like the last 3 days worth of caffeine that I had. And I think that people would be shocked. You know what? I'm going to do it.
Concerned for your health.
I'm going to do it.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm going to do it. Let me get the Zoom so that I
Tim stacking up his empties.
I was stacking up my empties. Are you ready for this? Hold on. This is going to be gnarly. Can you see that? And I'm not even joking. That was probably the last 3 days. So my wife actually, so the quick story behind that is my daughter came in today. This happened just today. And she goes, Daddy, what is all that trash? And I said, oh, that's just from when Daddy was finishing the book. She knows all about the book. And then she goes, I'm telling Mommy. And I said, don't be a fink. And she runs and gets my wife and brings her into the office. And I'm like, she goes, what am I looking at? And I go, she goes, Tim. And I go, you don't want to know the short amount of time in which I drank those. She goes, oh, I know. Oh, so there's that.
I just, this is likely inappropriate, but I imagine in the middle of that story, your daughter asks, Daddy, what's all that trash? And you said, oh, that's let's not worry about it. And she's like, no, Daddy, I meant sitting in the chair behind the computer because you're literal garbage. I don't know.
I thought you were going to say,
got him.
I thought you were going to say she saw a copy of A Dead Man's Guide to Dragongrin. Thought you were going to go hard in the paint.
And then exactly. And then it ended a lot more wholesome, and it wasn't a terrible thing that I said to you at your expense so that 9 people could potentially breathe quickly out of their nose.
Wait, her trashing on the last 2 years of his work that he's dedicated his life to is more wholesome.
Yeah, no, sorry. I completely misunderstood. I assumed you were saying the nice thing that your nice daughter would have said nicely, but no.
I see.
You were making my joke worse somehow.
So I just wanted to say hey to everybody in the chat. We do have Jonathan Miles is here, Creative Storm, Ampersand. I think we're in really good shape. Wild Pix is here. Thank you so much for tuning in. I absolutely just needed this, and we decided that we were like, you know what? Let's do a hangout, no format, no specifics, and just be with the community in this kind of crazy time. So here's a question. Now that A Dead Man's Guide to Dragongrin is over, because we'll talk about that more, what creative projects do you guys have on the horizon that you're ready and excited to bring to the forefront now that that's over, at least for the most part?
I was hoping to hear some cool stuff Jeff had going on. No.
Oh, I'd love
no
to hear.
takers.
What you got cooking, Jeff? Anything?
I was waiting to hear all of James's great plans, so I guess we've reached a stalemate. So as far as RPG stuff, I don't necessarily have anything immediate that I'm going to be jumping into. I've been toying with kind of publishing my own setting and rules book for the setting that I've been making, Glyph. I haven't really done a lot of that recently with kind of everything with DMG. That's definitely on the table. I've been doing a lot more music stuff lately, which is like, again, not RPG related, but since we're just in hangout mode.
Sure, that's fine. That's totally fine.
Recording singing stuff and kind of working on instrument chops, trying to pick up some piano and bass guitar chops, which I'm miserable at both of those. So that's been a fun learning process to start. And then some other, I think at this point, still secret projects that might be talked about other times. But yeah, that's kind of been my main stuff lately.
And James, while you gather your thoughts, I was just going to say that T the Writer asked me, he said, hey, Tim, cool Caco Demon, where'd you get that? And so he's talking about this. Oh no, James Hetfield is going to fall. Hold there, here. So this particular Caco Demon was actually a Christmas present from my brother Thomas. And I'm going to tell you something really cool about it. It's piggy bank. It is anatomically correct from Doom. That's its nose. But up here is where you put in the coin. I think it would be better if they would have made the coin slot the nose. So there's that. Oh no, Lars, I'm dropping my whole thing. What
I was working on. But no, overall, I have been gathering some notes for a system that is quickly becoming. I personally don't really like talking about the things I'm working on, specifically in this case, because I feel like I'm going to say things that make people go, oh yeah, right. And I'm like, well, these are the goals, not the things I've achieved. So
James,
please take that with a grain of salt.
I want to point out that was a Dead Man's Guide to Dragongrin. For 2 years,
fair enough.
We were like, no, we're going to make a narrative travel system. No, we're going to make a crafting system that's simple. No, we're going to make an infamy system. No, and it was like,
exactly.
Yeah, right. Oh, we're going to make character creation so that you can combine any type of creature with any type of culture. And it's like, sure, yeah. But these are the checks that we then have to cash later. So maybe that's good to put in the memo section what kind of check this is. Or not. No pressure at all either. If you don't want to talk about it, I don't want to press you to talk about it. I can talk all day, as we know historically.
Yeah, well, to sort of give an overall view of what I'd like to do. Again, this is going to sound like I'm saying I want to solve cold fusion with RPGs here. In my opinion, I could see it coming off that way. I'm coming up with. I started with like a RPG system, and it slowly rolled into the type of system that before you play or when maybe you decide you want to run a game, you make some decisions about the system. So a lot of times when we play Dungeons and Dragons, we go, okay, guys, we're going to do standard stat array. We're going to do third level. We're going to do, all these things. But when you say D&D, say 5th edition, we're rolling with a D20. And that I told you we're going to use milestone XP. You know what I mean? Like basically, there are things that are rules in the game, and then there are things that aren't rules, but they're ways you play, and that's a whole thing in itself. All of that to say, the goal would be to, as a GM, you go, okay, I want to run a zombie game. And similar to a thing like Genesis, this system would allow you to plug in a few specific gameplay elements to make it more like the apocalypse and less like high fantasy, for example. Something like you can go, our resolution system, instead of rolling a D20, we're going to roll 2 D10s, and this, is a success. And it's the kind of thing where if you did that in D&D, it would change the math, but it wouldn't change a lot of the other rules, where a success is a success and a failure is a failure. Doesn't matter what you roll or what card you pull to do it. It would be a system that allows you to make some of those decisions to get the tone you want, rather than saying, well, I don't really want to play D&D. I want to play Blades in the Dark. You'd go, well, I want a game that's harder or more brutal, so I'm going to use this rule specifically. It's kind of like you pick your rules from your menu to make the game you want instead of just switching systems. So again, solving cold fusion with RPGs.
I think that's really cool. And basically what you're creating is this sort of like, I'm imagining it being a hub, and you then put attachments onto the hub depending on what you want to get a mechanical outcome or narrative outcome, is what you're saying. So you're trying to create sort of this game engine at its core, and then people put their own mods onto it or their own pieces, and then that gives you the shape or the way that engine functions for that game. Is that right?
Exactly. And specifically, it's not because I feel like that's something that needs to be done, but it's a problem that I was coming up against where I go, oh, well, what if I want to run this kind of game? And I could see that becoming a sort of Swiss Army knife RPG system that doesn't do anything well and does everything mediocre or bad. But that would be the idea. Is I don't like the idea of somebody going, oh, I really love this thing and Powered by the Apocalypse, but I hate Powered by the Apocalypse. I like the idea that they go, oh, well, I could just take this cool system and this and kind of mash them together, and this system would give you the structure to do so.
Well, that's perfect. That's really cool to me. I got some questions in the chat. Go ahead, Jeff.
I was just going to say, I think probably the same thing that you were. I saw a question from Evelyn.
Yes.
It's just a really cool Dragongrin one, which is to all of us, what's your personal favorite region in Dragongrin? I know what my answer to that would be, but if anyone else wants to go ahead.
No, James and I have been rattling on about engines.
Yeah. So for me, my personal favorite is Zaman. I really dig the sort of like shifting environmental aspect of it. The fact that it's a place that can kind of move and has a will of its own to like act against or with the party is really interesting. And also it being the home of the Zarfin is specifically one of the cultures that resonates a lot with me. The Zarfin have a lot of me and my interests in them. So just as a region, there's a lot of it that really resonates with me. The fact that, that there's kind of this greater consciousness to it. The fact that the cultures there are some of my favorite cultures, the Grimdal and the Zarfin especially. And that there's, I just think a lot of really cool aspects of it. I like that the Lord of Ash in the region is just a guy. Like, it's just a person. Like, it's not the great vampire lord with magic. It's not, anything super crazy. It's just like, he's just a dude who knows how to give orders and come up with strategies well. And that's enough for him to be able to rule. He doesn't need crazy powers. So there's a lot about the region that I really like, especially like the constructs and the exploration. But yeah, the Zarfin, the Lord of Ash in particular, and the countdown to ruin for Zaman, I really enjoyed doing as well. So yeah, Zaman across the board really hits a lot of points that I super, super like.
Yeah, and I think the reason why it works so well is because it's so different. And I love that we didn't play into normal jungle tropes. We took those concepts and then we turned them a little sideways, so you got something totally new, this brand new thing. And so I'm very, very proud of Zaman and how we just made certain creative choices that are going to make it unique, so that if the players go in there, they're not going to get what they expect, but they won't be disappointed with what they get. And that's kind of a tough thing design-wise and creative-wise. So what about you, Jimbo Jambo?
So I just wanted to let everyone know that I spent a lot of time in the sun yesterday. So my skin is like very it's kind of burned off, and like it's creating this cartoon Mr. Clean spot where because the fan is on. I just wanted to make sure we were all on the same page that yes, I do know that's happening, and no, I don't care. No, I just thought it was very funny because
that's his favorite. That's his favorite region in the book is his Mr.
Guys,
Clean
I think I might be reading
shine.
a different version. No, my favorite, absolutely no question, is Sphere Below. Like sort of gangland style, gangs of New York. It's a really cool little microcosm within a world where things are already terrible. It's not that things are good. It's just that it's almost ridiculous that to some degree life is going on as normal as much as it can for some of these people, even in the fate, like basically the gangland kind of wars that people are having in the face of all of these other bigger problems is such a cool little thing where it's like, no, that's what would happen when things are terrible. People often kind of reach their new status quo fairly quickly. So a week after Lightfall, maybe not that soon, but 20 years, whatever we are now, it's the kind of thing where no, business has resumed. And yeah, you have to worry about Thought Slayers and Flesh Cauldrons and these terrible things and the Dismembered Lord, but also I need to make money and I'm going to, commit crimes to do that. And that's Sphere Below. And that's why I love it so much.
Yeah, and the cool thing, if you're not familiar with Dead Man's Guide to Dragongrin at all, and something you'll learn if you do get the book, is that the regions are called Dominions of Ash, and we worked really hard to make sure that it had not just a sort of biome and theme that you would expect in a fantasy world, so a forest or an underground place or an icy fjord-ridden kind of place. But we also tried to take and put a layer thematically on top of that thing. So as James mentioned, so Sphere Below could have easily just been, hey, it's the underground sort of subterranean canals and tunnels and all that stuff. But instead of it just being that, we're like, cool, you know what we're going to layer on top of that? Crime. Gang wars, turf wars, crime. And so that's the vibe of that. For Zaman, I know one of the things we kind of talked about was like it being exploration and recovering something that was lost, but exploring that in a very new and different way with, like Jeff said, this sort of like this moving environment. So it's less about go and find the dead relics of the past, and it's more about going in there and uncovering mysteries that matter to the world. So we really wanted to make the themes of exploration, and also sort of like in Dragongrin, religion isn't popular. So even being able to uncover some aspects of belief and some of the past that make an impact in the present. For me, it depends on the day, but right now, I would have to say Faygrave. Because Faygrave is our enchanted forest sort of place, but we made it so that it was constant autumn because of this magical event that happened where the elven life tree of Talus, one of the regions that Barker wrote and did an amazing job with, was ripped from the ground. Well, what does that leave? This place that was once called Fey Hold is now Fey Grave. And so it's this autumnal forest. But the thing that I love about it is this crazy like wilderness and frontier that plays against the fact that in all of the rest of Dragongrin, heroes are widely not welcome. And a hero is basically just anyone who causes problems, pushes against the status quo, and draws attention from the big bad, the dismembered lord. So evil rules in Dragongrin, so it's not common for a hero to pick up a sword and start waving it around and be successful. In Feygrave, things are so bad and overrun that if you are wanting to be a hero, you can go, and one of the tenets of that place is heroes are welcome here. Where, yeah, sure, come on. Yeah, you want to come over here? Yeah, grab the rusted sword of the people who died before you there, and then you go on in, and if you survive 3 days, well, maybe we'll pay you, you know. And that just seemed like a really cool place to run a one-shot or run a campaign of, like, the existence of evil, quote-unquote, and good guys fighting something common. So there's also a mythical creature rumored to be there known as a Typhon, which is kind of a neat concept. And the Lord of Ash, Jeff mentioned this briefly, those are the rulers and regents of the area, the dominions of Ash. In Feygrave, when the story begins in that section, it's been like a week or two since they were killed. And no one has become the new Lord of Ash. So you've got this really cool like set of ingredients for a power vacuum. Or, you know, who's going to be the Lord of Ash? And there are heroes there. So I think Feygrave right now, today, would probably be my favorite.
Yeah, I mean, my answer would change, I think, to that question depending on the day, just as quickly too. Of like, you catch me on a different day, and I'll say Grin's my favorite too. Like, I'm a huge fan of the way that Grin ended up as well, for a whole bunch of different other reasons. But yeah, it switches. Basically, anytime you ask me, I'll probably say something different for a different reason.
Yeah, and depending on what kind of game you want to run. We also wanted to make it so that this book was a toolbox, so that whether you're running it in Dragongrin or not, you could flip to it and go, awesome. You know, this kind of a metropolis or this kind of a jungle. Like, you could run this using 0 Dragongrin stuff and just reskin it all. I did want to take a quick moment to say a big congratulations to our friend Barker over at Ignite Inspire the Story. He just finished a huge deadline for a book that he's working on outside of AbTab. And I know he specifically even told me, he's like, look, man, I can't take a breath and be done with the Dead Man's Guide because I have this other deadline. And I see in the comments that he actually did finish that deadline. So Barker and everyone in the chat obviously wish Barker a huge congratulations because that's a milestone. And he's a big part of putting his fingerprints all over that project, which I don't know if it's public or not, so I'm going to keep it private. But in general, I know that Barker, I'll say this, I'll go as far as to say this, and hopefully I won't get in trouble. His writing was used as an example for other writers of like, hey, this guy's doing it right. And so I think that that's a really cool thing. But yeah, so big congratulations to Barker. Let's see some of the other comments.
Speaking of Barker, he also dropped the question. If we want to get into it, you can read some other comments first too. But he wants to know what everyone's favorite Lords of Ash are, like disconnected from the region, just like as a person.
Sure. What do you guys think? I'm gonna go through and read some of these.
Yeah, I was going to say, I saw that question and was looking to try and see, because I'm like, oh man, it's the same. Just like you said, Jeff, I'm like, my answer would change day to day.
I think I know who mine is, but what do you guys think? And Jeff, if you want to go, I think, and it's okay if it's the same as your answer previously, and if you want to expound a little more.
I mean, my answer right now in this moment is the same as the region. I really like Zamon's Lord of Ash, Laris. I'm forgetting his last name. High Fury, yeah.
Yeah.
Who wrote this book? I don't know.
Jeff, that's my joke.
No. We can have a really big conversation about that afterward, but the point is that there's so much. You write 400,000 words and remember one part of it on command.
Yeah, no, exactly.
No. Yeah, I really like Laris, High Fury, and Zaman, specifically because like he doesn't have any special powers. He doesn't rule his region just because he's undeposable by the people underneath him. In fact, he's built almost to be, I think, annoying. So the fact that he hasn't been deposed is really interesting. Of like, he's basically just nepotistically got given the role because he's got a famous family, and the family's like, hey, we're grooming our kid to be a badass leader. You want to give him, a cool spot? Sure. He can lead Zaman because that place is kind of crazy right now. So then being able to go in and just like, but the annoying thing is not only did he get like nepotistically given this position, like just purely out of his own fame and family prowess, he's actually good at the job too, which is like, I think it's always annoying when you see people when you see somebody given a position that they don't deserve, but then you kind of also have to respect that they're doing well at it. It's kind of a weird like mixture of emotions. Yeah, just the fact that he's just a guy who's getting by on the fact that he's smart. He's got a good head for leadership and he's got a good head for tactics. And that's kind of all that he needs to be able to control this region, and that he's actually got a pretty good handle on it, as crazy as it is, despite the fact that he's not, a crazy sorcerer or a vampire or, trained from birth to be this, mastermind of power. He's just a guy who's being a good leader. Like, I think there's something about that specifically that's fun to me, given how fantastical most of the Lords of Ash are. And all of them are cool. Like, don't get me wrong. I think that they're all super cool. But yeah, right now he's the one that stands out in my mind.
And I love that because I know when Jeff and I were brainstorming and kind of deciding like that particular one, because Jeff played a huge hand in a lot of the book, but especially Zaman, I really had a lot of fun. That was actually the first thing we brainstormed when we hired Jeff. It was really cool. Yeah. But I know for me, one of the inspirations that I was drawing from specifically was I'm a big fan of the Death Note anime. And I was like, I want this person to be extremely potent in terms of their mental capacity for strategy. And so we leaned on like Light Yagami and L, where it was like someone who can outthink you and outsmart you. And that if you ever face them in equal combat, it's probably a trap and they probably planned it and you're going to die anyway, even though you think you have the upper hand. And so I really love, so Laris High Fury is one of my favorites as well. I think, and I just want to point out Barker in the chat said Charlagash, who is, so Charlagash is an orc and she is the standing Lord of Ash, quote unquote, which basically means she killed the person who was the previous Lord of Ash, but did not actually claim the formal title of Lord of Ash. The way to do that is you have to take the reliquary that they wield, which is like their weapon or their item. You have to bring it before the dismembered Lord and get his approval. As a show of rebellion and power, she has kept the reliquary and she wields it, but she has not gotten full permission yet. And so we love that idea of like, so Barker, Charlagash is one of my favorite as well. For me, and I'm going to be really careful not to spoil anything because there are some aspects of this character where it could absolutely be a spoiler, and I don't want that to be the case. For me, it would probably be Siro, the Stormbreather in Uldane. And I will just say that she is a mysterious figure, and she has this rad mask that can breathe in this thing called the Bleak, which is this like storm that covers the entire region of Dragongrin from time to time, this arcane maelstrom. She has this rad mask that allows her to breathe it in, and she has this really cool relationship with these beasts known as Doomsayers that essentially have come from another dimension, but she has brokered a peace with them to give them something they want, and then she allows them to help serve the dismembered Lord. So just a lot of really cool stuff. And I won't spoil why I think she's the coolest, but it is definitely in the book, and it's one of the cool reveals you can give to the players as to who she is, what her story is, and why she's so super rad. So I will say Siro the Stormbreather. What about you, James?
I think mine is one of mine, as we talked about, is Aldous Bex from Talus. And just in general, Talus has become one of my favorite, and I would say this same sentence about every Dominion of Ash in the book. Talus is one of my favorite Dominions of Ash. But specifically, Aldous Bex has kind of a special story. I mean, I guess it's right in the thing there. The idea is he was almost chosen by the Dismembered Lord. Like, somebody killed him, and the Dismembered Lord was like, no, I reject your timeline and substitute my own, and was like, he is still the leader. But it creates an interesting power dynamic in that the Dismembered Lord kind of rules everything, but he does kind of have direct, specific control over Aldous in the sense that he has given him this and can take it away at any time. And I really like that for somebody so strong and so powerful, Aldous Bex, to kind of be in such an interesting position, and especially with where the Talus is sort of politically, you could say. Obviously, there are a lot of... It's easy for me to say, guys, read the book. Talus is really cool. But there are a lot of reasons he's my favorite. But kind of that idea of, in this world of all of these really big names and people, you still have a guy that's kind of like, even with all the power, is subject to, someone else's whims. And for some reason, that concept is really cool to me.
Yeah, Aldous Bex is a really cool one, and that's one that was also a brainchild of Barker of Ignite, inspired the story, and of course, Absolute Tabletop. So everyone's favorite stuff is stuff that Barker wrote, and I promise you, he wrote a lot of the books. So if you get the book, you'll have more stuff that's your favorite. Let me go ahead and go down. There's plenty of comments. So would either one of you like to juggle things verbally a little bit while I read some of these comments, or do you want me to just jump in and start reading comments?
I've been keeping up with them mostly. So yeah, I don't know. I can jump in here. I think that it is funny that you say that a lot of my favorite parts Barker wrote, because some of the things Barker wrote in Sphere Below, as I mentioned before. I mentioned Sphere Below before, but specifically Barker wrote a lot of that too. Again, there is a lot in the book that I really like. It is just funny that a few of us have so far mentioned things specifically that Barker wrote. I think that's really cool.
No, absolutely. So there is something really cool about a book like this, which is all of us touched everything to some degree between conversations or different things. Like, there is no way. And that's why I'm saving my big gooey thank yous for until it's over, because people are still helping me today. Like, I was asking Chris Wilhelm a question. I was asking Jeff a question. Like, there are things we're still fixing in this book or tweaking or changing, because, as you go through, it's this little treat of like, oh yeah, I forgot we wrote this. This is really neat. And can we tie this in somewhere else? And how do we make this book better? And of course, there's just like, frankly, there are going to be little things where a D20 table has a D12 at the top, or typos, and we're trying to catch all that stuff as well. But my point was, all of us touched this book everywhere to some degree, even if it was in a brainstorm. And so it's just really neat to see how an idea goes through a funnel, then hits the page, then is actually like edited to match the rest of the lore of the world. And I think that more than any other book I've been a part of, this one feels the most cohesive in tone, and that all of the ideas span the entirety of the book. Like, there are character names that we purposely use the same last name. And listen, we'll forget that. We're not going to remember that in 5 years, but it's there that we used, this person's last name and this person's last name as separate NPCs and separate dominions, just so that there was a little bit of that like verisimilitude. And so, yeah.
Yeah, it's been one of my favorite things about the overall book process, is exactly what you say, of like, because all of us kind of end up somewhere in everything, that there ends up being so much more color to a lot of the different things that end up in the book that we would not be able to get with just one person. Like, I know a lot of the ideas that I'll have will come from my own experiences, but then having Barker be able to come in and drop something in that he's really interested in, or have Tim come in and come up with an idea that he's really into, it adds like so much more character to just like whatever the basic idea would be. That the end product is something so far from something that any of us could do by ourselves. And you can see all those fingerprints if you look individually for them, but kind of the end point becomes this kind of weird collective vision in a way that, that was really exciting to see, and something that, coming in as as an extra person for this project that I hadn't experienced with this before, that was like really, really awesome to be able to see start to happen and come to life, of like seeing my original idea for something and then seeing the final page where everybody else has added all their extra things into it, and how much different it was, and always just way better than whatever I would have done.
Yeah, you have. Yeah. Okay, you go.
Oh, I just think that that's one of the interesting and sort of good things, a silver lining maybe to putting so much into this book. Obviously, it goes without saying we were late. This isn't the book that we would have released if we had released what we did have at the time. There's a lot to be said about that, but specifically this process elongated a lot of that, Jeff, where that has happened to us at AbTab, but usually, at least in size, an adventure kit, say, is much smaller and even much narrower in scope than this book, very quite clearly. The reason I bring that up is because this book, it's almost more clear, or at least to me, it's a lot clearer of, oh, Barker wrote a lot of that section. Yes, we all jumped in there and maybe threw in our brainstorm or did this or that. So when I say like, oh, well, Barker wrote Talus, I'm like, well, he didn't sit beginning to end and write. Well, I mean, okay, that's maybe a bad example for different reasons, but specifically, the idea is that sort of, even though certain people may have written the bulk of certain sections, it is really cool to get to see, to be able to, as a creator, go, oh yeah, I remember when that used to be this, when that Lord of Ash used to be this other person that we moved or changed for this reason. It's sort of cooler to be able to track that, at least now, to remember looking back at the book like, oh yeah, that was Jeff's idea, or, oh, somebody had that really cool idea, but Jeff made it way better because he said this thing, things like that. Just a really cool, fun creation because we exploded times 10 what we would usually do.
Yeah, and so what's really interesting to me is going to be how that then turns out with people using the book. Like, we have encouraged people from the beginning to say, hey, make your own Dragon Grid. This is not about learning our lore. This definitely is an atlas of inspiration. This is about saying, hey, cool, check this out. Go and look. So really, on the sneak, what we did was we created a bunch of stuff that you can easily use outside of Dragon Grid entirely. Jonathan Miles asked a question in the chat. He's like, oh, well, more of a statement. He's like, I didn't realize there was a crafting system within a Dead Man's Guide. So I want to address that quickly and just say that there is. And the way that we did it was we made sure that it was thematically very pertinent to the world. When we first started writing the book, and this is one of the things that made us take more time with it, we had all of these really cool pieces by themselves. So the beginnings of a crafting system, the finished infamy system, or at least what we thought was the finished infamy system. But if you look at them on the page, they felt like a bunch of little supplements. They were great. The character creation section, great, but it didn't feel like Dragon Grid. It felt like a sort of setting agnostic set of subsystems and rules and ideas and things like that. And we're like, no, we have to put another layer on top of it to make it 100% Dragon Grid, but also 100% usable. So Jonathan, the crafting system is actually a really cool system where you use these things called Valens. You go and you harvest parts of dead primordials, these big creatures that used to rule the world and roam the lands eons ago, but their remains are still here. You get their bone, their organ, their hide, their blood even, and you can put them together in these simple combinations to make items. Now, in your world, and maybe this is worth doing a series of short videos on, maybe for Facebook or something like that, of like how you can use the systems or an introduction to the systems. In your world, if the primordials aren't a thing, you could easily just replace those things with other monster parts. Maybe it's just normal monsters or normal creatures that they can go out and get these items from and then put them together to build what they're trying to build. But there's a crafting system. There's a magic item creation system, but it's got a layer over it of technology of the ancients called Titans. They're known as Archons. There's an infamy system so that you can become more famous or infamous for doing good or evil acts. And there's a travel system. All those things that are really tied into the world, but that you could use absolutely outside of the book altogether. Because I hear people all the time, oh, I wish there was a travel system. And there have been a few books that I think have gotten really close to what I would use, but this is something I will use. it's loaded with stuff like that. The Dominions of Ash, just quickly to say this, you could go in there and essentially run a campaign just off of the tables in there and some of the other tools in there, not paying attention to any of the Dragongrin lore at all. So, yeah, there's plenty of usable tools that have nothing to do with Dragongrin. Just catching up on the comments here.
Yeah, Jonathan mentioned also, he said, I really wish I had the group dynamic to work on my projects. And we say this a lot, but there's a big... I feel very lucky, and to some degree with Dead Man's Guide, beyond Absolute Tabletop, if you look at all the people that worked on the book, I'm not going to try and name them all as not to forget someone. It wasn't just the four of us at AbTab that did it all. You know what I mean? Like, a lot more people were involved, even at a proofreading level, but especially at a writing level and a mechanics level. And it was really cool because at Absolute Tabletop, we haven't expanded because it didn't make sense, right? We don't have a fifth person at AbTab because to some degree there was no reason to. But this was a book where it was like, hey, we'd really love so-and-so to look at it. We really want the writing of so-and-so because it was so big and our ideas were so big and we were so late that we really wanted to make sure we could get the book out. But I don't know, it was interesting to be in a position to organically grow in that sense. And it's really cool because I don't think we could have done it if we said, hey guys, we want to write a 400, plus page book and we want you, and you to do it,
Sure.
So it was just really cool because all of that to, I guess, lead up to is something that just kind of happens, that I know of. There's no easy way to assemble your Avengers without first having all their origin movies. It's like, no, it just doesn't work to just go, hey guys, let's all work on an RPG and do Dead Man's Guide, so I also hope that people can find the people that they can and want to collaborate with, but also that it's not easy, and I feel lucky to have been able to get that, basically.
We have some videos on this channel about that, actually, about finding your group. So dig into those and there it's definitely huge, and it's basically Don't Do It Alone, is I think the title of the short form. I just wanted to say hey to Chris Johnson, hey to Jeremy, what's going on, Adrian? And then if it's cool, I wanted to say, well, first I wanted to mention T the Writer, if you're still here, and Barker did an incredible job of answering the question, but given the state of things in Dragongrin, would you say that it's technically become an aristocracy or meritocracy rather? And Barker, who is the person that I would have thrown this question to, says, T the Writer, I think that's right on the money, and add in a bit of oligarchy, and that's the recipe because of the Council of Ash, this council that serves for the Dismembered Lord. We tried really hard to make sure that the Dismembered Lord, the big bad in the setting, felt just distant enough to be terrifying, but just hands-on enough to feel real and human. And so the Council of Ash was one of the things that we put in place to handle the day-to-day Dragongrin stuff at a high level. And it's basically, if you are a Lord of Ash and do well enough, you can get promoted to be the Council of Ash, which is basically right under the Dismembered Lord. So yeah, T the Writer, that is a fantastic... And I don't know if you've read the book or not, but that's a fantastic observation, hearing just what you're hearing. So great. One of the things I did want to do is, if it was okay with you guys, is Evelyn Tyndall, friend of ours, someone who has come to AtCon and someone who I've had the pleasure of hanging out with and gaming with, sent us, by us I mean the Core 4 and AbTab, an amazing, heartfelt message that I weeped, guys. I weeped and weeped. I wept. She just said, and I won't read the whole thing because it's I'll weep again probably, but she said, I mean, you guys said, hey, sorry, we need a little extra time to make this book we want it to be, and after 2 years, you gave us what gosh darn Tolkien gave us after 30 years. And while I'm not saying that this is as fleshed out or good as Middle-earth, I'm saying that it made someone else feel like it was. And that's cool. as a creator to have someone say that your world feels as fleshed out and real as Middle Earth does. And that's where the thumbs down machine gun happens on the video for anyone who's watching after the fact. But I just think that that's really cool. And she said a bunch of other really, really cool stuff. One of the things was how she normally doesn't like dark settings, but that we managed to make a dark setting that felt surprising and colorful and living, even though it was evil. And I'm like, we set out to do that. Everything's not gray and brown and drab and dingy. And it's like, no, there can be evil. And it's, in fact, we had the conversation, it's more terrifying if evil looks bright and normal, but is still evil. So yeah, I just wanted to share those comments. And Evelyn, thank you so much for those. They really meant a lot.
It's always really amazing as a creator to set out a design goal and then have someone like comment on the fact that they got the exact feeling that you were hoping that they would get. So yeah, I haven't heard those comments before, but that's super, super amazing. Especially the one about, the dark world, because that's absolutely specifically conversations that I remember having with Tim about a lot of these regions is like we don't want this to be like everything's gray and brown and, raining and fire all the time. Like it's because that's like comic book evil. Like real evil is, in the world as it is now,
Yep.
Bad things happen in New York City, even though there's glittering skyscrapers. There's still, terrible people who work in them, that there's something I think a lot more real about the fact that the world can still be beautiful and in some senses like amazing and cool. And we didn't want it to be something that was hopeless. So I'm glad that there's parts of the world that still feel like alive and that there's something, to fight for across that. Because that's absolutely something that we wanted to hit on. So it's amazing to hear that process of like, it'd be cool if we could make a world like this and then have somebody say the world is like that, that's a cool experience. So yeah, thank you, Evelyn, for those words.
And I just want to say, Jeff, that the thing you just hit on is exactly my response to her, which was, I think it's because we have sneakily made it so that it is a evil world. It's dark. It's a dark fantasy setting. But what we've done is we've injected this through line of hope throughout the whole thing. One of the things, and we explicitly stated in the book, it is written that the reason why the evils in Dragongrin are so great is so that heroes can rise to overcome them. To have truly powerful heroes, you need truly powerful threats. And so most dark fantasy settings celebrate the darkness. And I think that there's a fine line between celebrating it and being like, it's in your face and it's muddy and everything. And it's like, or here's an evil. What are you going to do about it? And one of them is way more interesting to me. And so we sneakily made it so that the hope is what you have the focus on the entire time. But the darkness is large enough so that it can easily overpower the hope, but there are ways to keep that alive. And so we definitely appreciate when people call out, as Jeff say, gosh, guys, as Jeff say, I weeped. But as Jeff has mentioned, when you set out to do something and you don't explicitly state it and someone tells you that's how they felt, it's like a high five designer goal where you're like, we did it. And then I'll just cap off this part of the conversation by mentioning another thing Evelyn said in this part of the chat. So in the YouTube chat, she says, I love how neat and tidy, but rich the lore of Dragongrin is. Everything feels equally distributed in terms of content and is never too much, but also just so full and wonderful. And I just have to say, that is another conversation we had where the way that we decided to write this book was knowing that we're handing it off to a game master to make more with it and giving them the most important pieces, but leaving all of the cool details up to them. By design, hey, here's the concept you wouldn't have thought of yourself, but there's not so much of it that you can't use it in your world. Run with it. So thank you for those kind words.
Yeah, and this somewhat dovetails into something the Creative Storm said. And the Creative Storm said, further into the setting, what was it like to develop a government under a tyrannical lord? Trying to develop a way things are run day-to-day on a day-to-day basis with Sauron must have been interesting. And what I wanted to say about that was at least from a creative standpoint, and this is my opinion, I've never actually really talked to anybody about this, but in writing Dead Man's Guide, something I realized was my preferred way of figuring something like that out is to make the decisions I want to make, and then from there, try to make it work so that it still holds up, right? So at no point did we really sit down and go, okay, well, what kind of government would it be? We said, well, the Dismembered Lord is this guy and he has Lords of Ash. What is that? You know what I mean? Oh, well, they have these seats. You know what I mean? Like, we kind of made up a form of government, and you can apply the labels we know today. But creatively, I think it's an interesting question because we didn't set out to develop a government that worked under a tyrannical lord. We made a world and went, oh, well, I guess that's how it would work. And in as many cases as we could, tried to make sure that it did work, or that at the very least we explained something that maybe didn't work with magic. But realizing that, I kind of realized that recently, that for me, things happen creatively that way rather than the other way. And as creators, sometimes it's important to remember, maybe don't set out to try to make the government work, make the world and go, well, how would the government work? And then from there, it's potentially a little easier to figure out.
And then the other thing is that there's this amazing conversation happening in the chat as well that I want to just kind of echo, because it answers the question that you just mentioned by the Creative Storm. And Barker says, hey, I won't say too much because of spoilers, but there are real arguments that the Dismembered Lord saved Dragongrin from destruction by seizing control. It's a horrible place, but at least it exists. And so something that I will say, and this is absolutely without spoilers, but, there are things we purposefully didn't say outright in the book, but there is never confusion and there is never any sort of shying away. So we have these things called lore triangles. Because if I ask right now, anyone about anything, if I ask them about their opinions on this quarantine and the stay-at-home order, if I asked 3 different people, I would get 3 different answers, even if they believed the same thing. And so what we said was, the real world isn't as clean as one game master saying, in the beginning, this is how it was, and it was always the same way. Because that's not, for me, it's BS. That's baloney world building, and I don't want to memorize your thought pattern to run my game. So instead, we had this thing called the lore triangle, which says, some say, others whisper, many believe. Just like a real thing. So there are 3 different aspects of what that thing could be. And then you as the game master, you decide which one is more your Dragongrin. So there are plenty of those in the book. We didn't want to do that for the Dismembered Lord. But what we did want to do is present the story of how he came to be. And I will give 0 detail, but I just want to explain how we wrote it. And this was an idea that Jeff and I brainstormed, and I think it actually came out really nicely. When you see the Dismembered Lord story, because we wanted that to be one that we told, something that we said, this is our Dismembered Lord, okay? When we wrote that story, we wanted to understand that there are going to be people who believe that he did the right thing and are zealously following what he did. Then there are going to be people who believe he did a terrible thing, and there's going to be a bunch of people in the middle. So when you go to the Dismembered Lord section, there is a breakout box that tells one side of the story from one perspective, and then underneath it, there's text that tells that exact same story from another perspective. And it's up to you as a game master or as a player to decide what you believe. Then, canonically in the book, we mention that the Dismembered Lord is a Dismembered Lord in multiple timelines in multiple places, and that my Dismembered Lord, the one that we wrote for the book, is not yours, and that is canonically correct. And that in these alternate timelines and alternate universes, every Dragongrin, this is canon. As one of the creators, I'm telling you, this is canon and this is the way that it works. When you take that book and start running Dragongrin at your table, your universe exists canonically as one of the alternate universes of Dragongrin. And that's written in the book. So your Dismembered Lord could be anything you want because of how the timeline progressed in yours, and it's canon. Now, we also didn't want to cop out. So if you want to go through and read that, that is a really cool part of the book, I think, is to read the Dismembered Lord and how those two things could be viewed.
Yeah, it's something that I'm really happy with the whole book, the way specifically that turned out is like, because I'm totally with you. I think it's really, for one, it's difficult to use, and it can feel really unrealistic to say like, here is the exact history in perfect detail of the world that there's somehow this consensus about, that everybody, understands the same way and believes the same things about. In one sense, like, it's fun as a world builder to like create details and like make those things be a part of your world, and you want to like find enough meat for people to grab onto and say like, oh, this is a really interesting part of the world that that's declared and said like, no, this matters to the world. But there is definitely a sense of making something that feels real, in the sense that some things in the world we just don't know. We won't know for sure, and we can't know for sure. It's just not possible for us to go back in time and see what history was actually definitively like. We kind of just have to guess, and our own biases come into those explanations. And it's a really cool way to sort of still get ideas across to people of like, if you want to know what this thing is like, here's 3 choices that you can take and you can use, and they'll be cool and they'll make sense. But if you want to sort of give it that more, realistic flair of like, who knows what happened 5,000 years ago? We'll never know. We can't know. But people will certainly tell you anyways, what they think it was, and they'll know for sure that they're right. So yeah, it's a really cool tool. That funny story that actually at first I was like, I don't know, Tim, I don't know about this. It seems like we're just being wishy-washy with the lore. We're not giving any answers to people. But by the end of the process, I had absolutely been won over by it as an idea. And yeah, I'm super happy with where it ended up in the final product, that I think covers the content really well, but also gives it the ambiguity that can make for some really interesting questions about the world.
Yeah, and it also achieves something that I've never seen come up as a concern directly. Like, I've never seen somebody go, I wish a system would do this. And specifically, when you spell out exactly what did happen, you don't get to separate the player's knowledge from the character's knowledge necessarily. So for something so big about the Dismembered Lord, or maybe even just the Lord of Ash in the area they're in, if you're playing in Dragongrin, the idea is if they know the way a specific thing happened, say, for example, if they come across somebody that doesn't think that, they have the answer already. But if they come across somebody that has the other part of a lore triangle and you can't prove it either way, you get to play in that gray area that otherwise you would lose, because if you know you're right or you know you're wrong, it doesn't matter. And so in that way, I think it creates a really cool table dynamic where, just like a player can choose a flaw for their character, they could conceivably choose a belief about a thing. And you can have 2 players in the same game, one on one side of Lightfall and one that was potentially on the other, like we did in one of the campaigns we were running. And it makes sense because one character can't point to the other and say, I can definitively prove within the world that you're wrong. It is a belief. Yes, and in so many systems, beliefs don't exist.
Yeah, and it really, in the meta, and this was something that we had considered. It wasn't, I would say, a tier 1 design goal, but it was certainly in the mix, which was it eliminates the ability for elitism for Dragongrin in a lot of ways. So if I'm at your table and I helped to write the book, but I have to go into your Dragongrin not knowing anything by design, canonically. And so there could be some universal truths, but I love the idea that there's no gatekeeping. You can't go, actually, technically, the Marrow operate like this and this and this. And it's like, actually, no, they don't. And we encourage people to say, no, make your own. And you can't have a game master who, usurps another game master as a player. And unfortunately, I've been part of games where that has happened, where it's like, well, technically in the Forgotten Realms, I would be able to get a horse in this duchy because they're the horse lords of, and it's like, that's not a thing in this book, the way that it's written. And I love that. And I want to point out Jeremy Lilly of Erasmus Expeditions. This is beautiful. Let me point this out so that if anyone wants to do something like this, they can actually do this in their game. He says, I had my players in the White Lotus Black Jade campaign come from 2 different clans. The first 2 sessions were clan sessions where they each played through the same legend, and it gave them different truths. And that is the hotness of game mastering. It's so, so, so good. And I love that we kind of achieved that with this book overall.
Yeah, we when we were way back when we were just talking about the book, you referred to it as an atlas of inspiration, and we talked about the concept even before this was ever going to be a book, of making sure that we created something that allowed people to make their Dragon Grid. And it was just a concept that made sense, and it's kind of technically the goal of a lot of setting books for any RPG, because you're almost never going to follow it exactly to the letter, simply because if you play the same module with different characters, it's going to be different. We just really leaned into it because, yeah, there aren't that many sort of instances that I've seen of beliefs, personal beliefs in a system. And especially when you apply that to the players and leave those gray areas, it just creates a world that's more like real life instead of the thing we were really trying to avoid, which was just an encyclopedia of what Dragon Grid is.
Yeah, and I think if you give those answers too directly in the book, you undercut a lot of the cool potential moments and conversations that you can have as players and characters in the world and in the game. Like if the book specifically says, like, here's how religion is definitely, then like any opportunity that you could have for like any sort of, like answering the big questions of life and existence can be really gratifying to do in games, especially through difficult moments. And those conversations are much less interesting if the answer is clearly, singularly defined. So yeah, I like, specifically, James, you brought up the idea of like having characters with different beliefs about the same thing, be able to talk like honestly without either of them being right. Like I think that like that specifically is something that is a really interesting thing that it offers that, most setting books don't necessarily give. You can find ways to like add it in specifically, but yeah, that specific scenario, especially like the one that Jeremy says of like two people believing different things about the same historical event, like that to me is, it's like some of the best popcorn moments that you can have as a GM is watching two players argue about your cool event in the world and try to figure out which one is right, knowing that neither of them can really say.
Yeah. And so, and as we're going to come to a close here shortly. So any final comments you want to throw out there or things, now is the time we're going to kind of wrap up. And we're so appreciative that you're hanging out with us and hope everyone is healthy and well. But one of the things that we did purposefully is that, and this is one of the other reasons why we took a little extra time, was if you read the lore in one culture section about an event, specifically there's a culture called the Talisar and there's a culture called the Granach Thane, the way that they paint the picture of what happened is a little different. And it's the same pillar events, but the way that they present it in their little lore paragraph about what they did in Lightfall, this big battle, it's a little different. And they both paint themselves as a bit of a victor, even though both lost something. And then in the same way, even in the meta, you had these two forces that opposed each other eons ago, called the Titans and the Primordials. We purposefully wrote their paragraphs of lore from their perspective. It's not literally them writing it, but us as the writers, the way we paint the specifics is favorable to them, even though it presents negative information. So if the Primordials won, the Titans might say, oh, well, we rallied and we were forced to gather together and pool our resources in the face of adversity. Whereas when the Primordials won, it describes it as how they were essentially defeating the Titans handily. And so those little things are meant to make you think. They're thought-provoking. And I think that as people start to run Dragon Grid because it's brand new and they start to really dig in, I think that there are going to be a lot of cool layers that unravel over the years. And I love that. There are a bunch of Easter eggs from other Absolute Tabletop products. Some people had mentioned like, well, what about this? Death Note made it into your book. The inspiration from Death Note made it into the book, but there are some things that specifically are directly inspired by other AbTab products or things like, I'll say this, here's one Easter egg that no one could ever know. Every countdown to ruin in the book, which starts it basically is your campaign starter, and it's this countdown to the world ending. It's at the end of every region. Every one of those started out as a Metallica album track list. Just for fun, because I'm a huge Metallica fan and I wanted that footprint in the book. You'd never be able to know that, maybe, because there was no rule that had to stay that, and the names aren't there, but it was inspired by. That's where we started. And just that, so that's it. There's so much of that throughout the whole thing and I kept notes on all of it. So someday we'll reveal all that to the world. But
yeah, there's a lot of super cool references and like ideas that like have come from all those little things. Like my little Easter egg that I'll give that I'm happy with is the Zarfin specifically as a culture. Their beliefs and their practices are like directly inspired basically from my experience in the jazz music world of like the very like improvisational nature, even down to like the little tests that jazz musicians will give to each other of like, if you want me to teach you, you got to prove to me that you can play. So let's hear you blow over some changes and do some cool improv. And then once you show that you're good, then you can come be in the club. But until there's a lot of like weird like jazz culture isms that the Zarfin have that are very sort of separated, that we've changed so that it's masked, but, down to like improvisation and working in like sort of creative collectives and sort of grabbing from each other's styles and more learning hands-on rather than like learning from a book of like, no, if you want to learn to solo like John Coltrane, learn to play John Coltrane's solos, learn them by ear and play them, like that sort of thing, was very in the jazz community. And the Zarfin specifically as a culture have tons of that lifestyle put into their culture, which is just like a little thing from me that, that I really love coming from a jazz background that I got to put in to the book. So that's my Metallica album track list equivalent is the Zarfin are jazz artificers basically.
Which is such a neat concept. I'm done. That's it.
Yeah.
I love the concept that it's
no, it is
they
very
use
cool.
technological advancements and being able to tinker and build on the fly and come up with cool inventions the same way that a jazz musician would in our world. And it's just like, that was so fun.
Yeah, there's a I'm trying to find it to make sure. Dang, I can't remember the name. There's a this doesn't help you, but my story like that is there's a board game where you are like little like gnomes or dwarves on a ship, like it's a fantasy game, and you have like this little cutout of a ship, and you try to make it home or like do missions. But the concept is it's one of those games where there are more things than you can reasonably do. So you kind of have to put out the fire or close the bulkhead or attack the thing and you barely eke by to make it. And that was my inspiration. I helped fill out some of the information, some of the, character descriptions and stuff for one of the cruxes. One where you go under, in the goalless, the Titan blood ocean to help salvage. And a lot of my inspiration was pulled from sort of a wacky board game where you just try to make it home, in one piece on a sub. And it's like, I mean, you pull inspiration from everywhere, but that crux will always remind me of that board game now because that's the mindset I was in. And that's kind of where I went back to get some of those ideas.
Yeah, and there's a lot of cool stuff. And I guess we'll kind of just end it with this and say, I would love to do a series of videos, whether it's, us as all, a tabletop terrorist proper, or if it's like when we can just the certain parts of the book of like going through and saying, hey, this is how we wrote it. This is how we intended it to be used. And like, so that people can jumpstart and do it faster rather than reading 450 pages and 456 pages and, absorb it all and figure out how to use it. But one of the things that I think is pretty cool about this book, at least for me, is that it was really, really challenging. And it was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done. And there were times where I didn't think I was going to make it. It was tough. But it's what we signed up for, so I never said that. I never said that until it was finished because it was really important to me that if I did ever say that, the last thing I wanted was for a backer to say, well, then why'd you say you could do it, Well, come to find out, we actually accidentally wrote 2 of them in a row in terms of word count. But the reason why I bring it up is because of this. Music and my family and these guys helped me get through that time. So as we wrote the different sections of the book and as we were beholden to deliver certain parts of the book to the backers when we said we would in the stripped down format, I would always work in some sort of reference to the album that I was listening to. A lot of the times I would just listen to one main album. And that's how I would do it. And so if you look back, if you go back to the release schedule, if you're a backer and you look at when we promised the updates, you can pinpoint when we wrote certain parts of the book or finish writing certain parts of the book, because I worked those albums in one form or another, whether it was a voice line an NPC says, the name of a crux, the name of an NPC. Every single album made its way in there, from Blink 182, Jimmy Eat World, 9 Inch Nails to, Avenged Sevenfold, In Flames, all these different bands that helped get me through. And that is just something that I love. And I loved that the other guys did similar stuff with bands that inspired them, or like Jeff said, with the jazz and all that. And so I guess that the point I'm trying to make is that as hard as this was, we were able to pour so much of ourselves into this book. And it was something that I'm really proud of and really thankful to have been able to do, that a lot of people haven't been able to do. And when you're reading through these pages, you're not just seeing lore and you're not just seeing, I don't know, let's make it this person. You're seeing heartfelt choices that we made deliberately because we love what we do and we love you. And we wanted you to have an awesome experience. Evelyn says, Jeff Doty, you're so fine. You're so fine. You blow my mind. Jeff Doty. Jeff Doty. We have songs about Jeff. He's a man of legend.
Something like that.
True.
He's
a man of something.
He's a man of something. It says, this book would be nothing like it is if it were not for Jeff Doty. And this is Barker saying it. I agree. Jeff, there are hours of WhatsApp messages between Jeff and I. And I think someday that would be...
Sometimes in one day.
And I think that would actually be cool to revisit and release edited. Because you could see from when we hired Jeff in June of last year, the steady stream, and I made sure they're all backed up. So there's you can see the brainstorms of writing each section, writing each subsystem, and writing all that stuff. And I think it would be really cool as it... later, not now, but sometime soon, maybe in the year anniversary or something, edit some of those and release the brainstorms that matched the lore. But yeah, Jeff, I'll just say it publicly and say that this book would not have been what it is or even finished on time if it wasn't specifically for you. And I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. It's extremely generous, the things that you guys have said about the things that I've done. And yeah, it means a lot to me. And it's being a part of this project has been one of the most amazing creative experiences that I've been able to be a part of. So genuinely thank you guys as well for having me on as part of the team. It's the team that you guys have here and the way that you guys work is pretty one of a kind and pretty amazing. So being able to be on the inside of that, even just for this project has been, some of the greatest things that I've been able to do creatively. And this book is one of the things that I'm most proud of in terms of all the creative stuff that I've done, genuinely. So thank you guys just as much for having me on.
Absolutely. Well, I think we're going to...
Oh,
go ahead.
Sorry, just real quick. I think people would genuinely be shocked to see the hour count of the brainstorm messages that we've done. It's genuinely obscene. But yeah, that'd definitely be something interesting to do at some stage.
That's Jeff's nice way of saying, listen to me. I would wake up in the morning to an hour of voice messages from Tim. It was punishing. Please help me. He's blinking a bunch of times, Morse code.
Send help.
I would not have been able to work through a lot of that stuff if it wasn't for those brainstorms and the ability to... One thing I'll say is that, Jeff, you were able to keep track of the threads, because I'll juggle 5 concepts at once, and unfortunately, Jeff would have to bear the brunt of that, and we'd make notes and reply to messages, and that'd be fun to release. I really do think that would be a cool way to do it at some point, but it is pretty mind-boggling because I have an hour commute, and I would basically be able to listen to and respond to like one set of messages. It was amazing. But yeah, we will do a formal, I know I will do probably a big, long, formal thank you to everyone involved in the book. We're just talking about Jeff right now, but of course there were a ton of people, including the AdTab guys, of course, who made this book possible, and of course all the backers. But Parker says, genuinely obscene, the name of our
that was the last thing. That was the last thing I was going to mention. I'm like, no, that is worth bringing up because absolutely there's no better name.
Yeah, I mean it. And so it was genuinely obscene. And you know what? I feel like I am so grateful that the book that came out of the other end felt like it was worth all the investments we made of time, of sanity. Like there's a good year's worth of TV shows that I missed because I couldn't dig in. But I'm not, again, I don't say, and I never mentioned it then because that was not okay for me to mention, but it is okay to mention now. I was like, the joke I had was I have a Captain America out of the ice list that I'm like, hey, this is my list of stuff that I need to catch up on. And so I'm very excited to play some Doom Eternal and to watch a bunch of shows that have been recommended to me and to just veg out some nights. But still not until, that's why I haven't sent out my thank you, not until the book is finished and we send it off to the printer and it's on its way to all of the backers and pre-orders. So, any final thoughts before we end it, guys?
Yeah, just thanks for all the support and the comments that we've gotten about the book. It's been amazing. And seeing the outpouring from people saying it's cool and asking questions and stuff has been really cool. Yeah, so thanks to the people who have dealt with all the process of getting it out, and thanks for appreciating and commenting on it.
Yes. And so I guess we'll finish it with a Tabtarian toast. If anyone watching wants to grab any sort of beverage, liquid, fluid, make sure it's safe to drink and sanitary. And we will do a Tabtarian toast. Don't drink mosquito-ridden still water.
May you mend the first break.
May you kill the first snake.
May you conquer everything you undertake.
Sláinte.
Killed it on that one. I just finished the drink, so that's perfect timing. But hey, have a great night, everybody, and can't wait for what's next.